4:30 in the morning. 5 semi-trucks crawl down a frozen Oregon road like a convoy heading to war. Their cargo isn't machinery, isn't feed, it's garbage. 8 tons per truck of spent coffee grounds nobody wants. Black, rotting, worthless. And one woman just signed a contract to bury her dying farm in it. The neighbors will call her insane by noon. The county will threaten to shut her down by March. Her own daughter stands at the window watching those trucks arrive, already crying from the shame of it. $92,000 in debt, 3 years of failed crops. Dead soil that killed her husband and now refuses to grow anything except dust. But in the machine shed, hidden inside her late husband's notebooks, there's a sentence written in fading ink. The soil just needs someone to believe it can live again. She believes the first truck backs up to the field. Hydraulics groan, and 40 tons of what everyone calls waste begins transforming into what no one can see yet. A miracle disguised as a mistake. Have you ever been called crazy for believing in something no one else could see? Barbara Mitchell stood in the pre-dawn darkness of her kitchen watching 5 semi-trucks crawl down County Road 12 like metal beetles searching for carrion. 4:30 in the morning. January cold bit through the window glass. Her coffee sat untouched on the counter, steam rising, curling, vanishing into air that smelled like desperation and old wood. The trucks weren't lost. They were coming for her, behind her, footsteps, light, hesitant. Kathleen stood in the doorway, wearing Robert's old duck sweatshirt, the one with the hole near the collar that Barbara could never bring herself to throw away. Her daughter's face carried that expression, the one that said she already knew, already hated whatever came next. Mom, Barbara didn't turn around. Those are coffee trucks, not a question. Statement. Flat as week-old soda, yes. Coming here, yes. Silence stretched between them like barbed wire. Outside, air brakes hissed. The lead truck swung wide into their gravel drive. Headlights swept across the kitchen wall, turning everything briefly white before plunging back into shadow. Kathleen moved to the window, pressed her forehead against the glass. You signed the contract. Barbara finally looked at her daughter, 20 years old. Same green eyes Robert had, same stubborn jaw, same inability to trust that maybe, just maybe, her mother wasn't completely insane. $200 a week, Kath, for garbage, for coffee grounds, which is garbage. Barbara picked up her mug, took a slow sip. The coffee had gone lukewarm, bitter. She drank it anyway, depends on what you do with it. Kathleen spun around. Her voice climbed an octave. Everyone is going to think we've lost our minds. You know that, right? Kenneth Walker is going to have a field day. The whole church is going to whisper. I have to go back to school in 3 days and face people who are going to ask me why my mother is running a dump. Another truck pulled in, then another. The diesel engines made the coffee in Barbara's cup vibrate in tiny concentric circles. Let them ask. Mom, we owe the bank $92,000. The wheat failed. The barley failed. This land hasn't produced anything in 3 years except dust and bills I can't pay. Barbara set the mug down harder than she meant to. Porcelain cracked against formica, so yes. I signed a contract to let Portland Roast and Bean dump their coffee waste on the back 40. And yes, it's going to smell. And yes, Kenneth Walker is going to make jokes. And yes, people are going to talk. She met her daughter's eyes. But we need the money. What Kathleen didn't know. What Barbara had never told her. The library books she'd been checking out for 2 years. Composting, soil biology, carbon sequestration. The notebooks hidden in the machine shed where she'd calculated ratios and temperatures and moisture levels, until her handwriting blurred and her eyes burned. Robert's last words before the combine rolled, before the steel and corn and August heat took him. The soil just needs someone to believe it can live again. She believed. Outside, a man in an orange reflective vest climbed down from the lead truck. 40s, lean. He carried a clipboard like a shield. Barbara grabbed her barn coat from the hook by the door. Stay inside if you want. Kathleen didn't move. Just stood there in Robert's sweatshirt looking like she'd watched her mother sign away the last shred of their dignity. Barbara stepped out into cold that stung her lungs. The man with the clipboard approached. Work boots crunching gravel. His breath made fog. Mrs. Mitchell? That's right, Brandon Flores. Fleet supervisor for Portland Roast. He extended a hand. Cal-used palm. Firm grip. Appreciate you helping us out. Landfill costs have been killing the company. Barbara nodded toward the trucks. Where do you want them? Brandon pulled a folded map from his clipboard, spread it on the hood of his pickup, pointed to the back 40 acres, the dead zone. 3 years of failed crops and soil so depleted, it turned to powder when you grabbed a handful, along this perimeter. We'll dump in rows so you can manage the piles. How much per load? About 8 tons, Barbara did the math, 5 trucks. 40 tons of wet coffee grounds about to become her problem, her salvation, or her complete destruction depending on who you asked. Let's do it. The first truck back toward the field, beeping, grinding gears. Then the hydraulics engaged with a mechanical groan that sounded like the earth itself objecting. The truck bed tilted, and 8 tons of spent coffee grounds slid out in a black avalanche. Steam rose immediately. The pile looked like a wound in the frozen grass. Dark, glistening wrong. The smell hit 3 seconds later. Bitter, sour, alive in a way that made Barbara's eyes water. Not fresh brewed morning coffee, fermented coffee, dead coffee. Coffee that had already given everything it had and now just wanted to rot in peace. Behind her, the front door slammed Kathleen. Running back inside, Brandon winced. Yeah, the smell is pretty rough at first. Some people complain. Barbara watched steam curl off the pile, watched it twist in the frozen air, watched it carry that smell across her property, across Kenneth Walker's fence line, probably all the way to town if the wind shifted right. How long does it last? The smell? Brandon scratched his jaw. Depends. Few weeks. Maybe a month if you don't cover it. The second truck started dumping, by sunrise. 5 massive black hills squatted across the back 40, like something that crawled out of a nightmare and decided to stay. Each pile steamed, each one reeked. Together they looked like the kind of mistake that followed you for the rest of your life. Barbara stood among them, alone. The trucks had left. Brandon had left. Even the sun seemed reluctant to fully commit to the day, hanging pale and distant above the pine trees. She pulled out the small thermometer she'd bought from the feed store, the one the clerk had looked at funny when she asked for the longest probe they had. Pushed it deep into the center of the nearest pile. 143 degrees, the coffee grounds were composting already. The microbes inside generating heat, breaking down, transforming, becoming something new. Barbara pulled the thermometer out, wiped it on her jeans, made a note in the small spiral notebook she kept in her coat pocket. January 15, 1995. 5 piles, average temp 143 Fahrenheit, smell, severe, neighbors, imminent. She was right about the neighbors. By noon, Barbara's phone had rung 11 times. She stopped answering after the 7th call. Let the machine pick up. Listen to the messages pile up like evidence at a crime scene. Barbara, this is Edith from the church. We're concerned about the smell. Could you give me a call? Hey, it's Tom from down on Calapooya Road. What in the Sam Hill is going on over there? Mrs. Mitchell. This is Douglas County Public Health. We've received several complaints about an odor issue on your property. Please call us back to discuss. And then Kenneth Walker. She recognized his truck before she saw his face. Red Dodge Ram, oversized tires. Confederate flag bumper sticker he claimed was about heritage, not hate. He pulled up to her fence line and just sat there, window down, arm hanging out. Grinning, Barbara walked over, slowly. Let him wait, Kenneth. Barbara. He nodded toward the piles. Starting a new business venture? Working on the soil, His grin widened. And here I thought you were opening the valley's first coffee-scented landfill. Could charge admission. Come smell the Folgers Hills. Has a nice ring to it. Behind him in the truck bed, 2 teenage boys laughed. His sons, both wearing camouflage. Both looking at Barbara like she'd confirmed every joke they'd ever heard about the crazy widow on the hill. You done? Kenneth shrugged. Just getting started, actually. Wondering if you're planning on doing something about the smell, or if we all just need to buy nose plugs now. Barbara crossed her arms. It'll fade. When? When it's ready. That's not really an answer, Barb. It's the only one I've got. Kenneth's smile faded. Not completely. Just enough to let her know he was shifting gears. Moving from mockery to something harder. Robert and I were friends, past tense. Like her husband's death had severed all obligation to basic decency. I know if he were here. He's not. Silence. The boys in the truck bed had stopped laughing. Even they could feel the air change. Kenneth put his truck in gear. You know people are going to talk. Let them. He drove off. Slowly, taking his time. Making sure she watched him leave. That night, Barbara sat in the machine shed with Robert's old notebook spread across the workbench. He'd kept meticulous records, rainfalls, soil pH, crop yields. His handwriting cramped and careful like he was writing instructions for someone who might need them later. She found the page she'd read 100 times, March 1987. Soil test results back. Organic matter, 1.2%. That's dying, need to feed the land. But how? Chemical fertilizer just makes it worse. Burns through what little life is left. Need carbon, need biology, need time. Below that, indifferent ink added later. The soil just needs someone to believe it can live again. Barbara traced the words with her finger, felt the slight indentation where he'd pressed hard with the pen. like he was trying to make it permanent. Make it matter, a sound behind her. Kathleen stood in the doorway, still wearing Robert's sweatshirt, hair pulled back, face tired. I'm sorry I ran inside this morning. Barbara closed the notebook. You don't need to apologize, Kathleen stepped into the shed, wrapped her arms around herself. I don't understand what you're doing. I'm feeding the soil, with garbage, with carbon. Kathleen's face scrunched. Confusion, frustration. The look of someone watching their mother speak a language they'd never learned. Why? Barbara stood, walked to the window, looked out at the black piles steaming in the darkness. Because this land is dying. Kath has been for years. Your father knew it, tried to figure out how to save it. And now I'm trying to finish what he started. By covering it in coffee grounds, by giving it what it needs to breathe again. Kathleen was quiet for a long moment. Then, people are going to think you're crazy, probably. The school called my dorm. Someone's mom asked if our family was okay. If we needed help. Barbara turned around. What did you tell them? Kathleen met her eyes. Green on green. Mother and daughter. So alike it hurt. I told them we were fine, are we? Kathleen smiled. Sad, I have no idea. The next morning, Barbara started working. 4 a.m. coffee first. Then out to the piles while stars still burned cold overhead. She'd loaded the old truck bed with straw bales, rotten hay, 3 tons of aged manure from the neighbor who'd been happy to get rid of it. She mixed them by hand, pitchfork, shovel, rake, breaking up the feed grounds, folding in the brown materials, creating layers, radios, 40% coffee, 30% straw, 30% manure. The work made her shoulders burn, made her hands cramp, made sweat run down her spine despite January cold that turned her breath to fog. She didn't care. The pile needed turning, needed oxygen, needed to be built right or it would just sit there rotting instead of transforming. By the time sun cleared the tree line, she'd mixed 3 of the 5 piles. Her back screamed. Her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves. But the piles looked different, less like waste, more like potential. She stabbed the thermometer into the freshly turned pile, 156 degrees, hotter than before. The microbes working harder, eating through the carbon, multiplying, creating heat as a byproduct of their feast. Barbara smiled. Behind her, gravel crunched. She turned 10. Kathleen stood there in jeans and a heavy coat, hair in a ponytail, work gloves in her hands. I figured you could use help. Something in Barbara's chest loosened. Some knot she hadn't realized was choking her. You don't have to, I know. Kathleen pulled on the gloves, picked up a pitchfork. But you can't do this alone. They worked in silence, mother and daughter, moving through the piles, turning, mixing, building something neither of them fully understood but both were beginning to believe might actually work. By March, the smell had changed. Still strong, still present, but less aggressive. Less like death and more like earth. Like soil waking up after a long sleep. The phone calls hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd increased. Douglas County Public Health sent an inspector. Middle-aged man with a clipboard and an expression that suggested he'd seen everything and been disappointed by all of it. He walked the property, made notes, took pictures, asked questions. Barbara answered with the patience of someone who knew she was right, even if she couldn't prove it yet. Mrs. Mitchell, you understand there are regulations about waste disposal. This isn't waste disposal. It's composting. The neighbors have filed complaints. I'm sure they have. He flipped through his notes. The smell. The appearance. Some concerns about groundwater contamination. Barbara pulled out her own notebook, showed him the temperature logs, the moisture readings, the planned timeline. I'm following standard composting protocols. The temperatures show active thermophilic decomposition. No pathogens survive above 135 degrees. I'm turning the piles weekly, monitoring moisture. This is agricultural composting, not illegal dumping. The inspector studied her notebook. His expression shifted. Not quite approval, but something close to respect. How long have you been planning this? 2 years. And you think it'll work? Barbara looked past him toward the piles. Toward the soil that had failed her for 3 years. Toward the land Robert had died trying to save. I have to believe it will. The inspector closed his notebook. I'm going to recommend we give you 6 months. After that, we'll reassess. But Mrs. Mitchell? Yes, you better be right. The county council meeting happened in early March. Kenneth Walker had collected 52 signatures on a petition demanding the county shut down Barbara's operation. She learned about it from Pastor Andrew Jackson, who called the night before to give her a heads up. Barbara, I think you should attend. Let people hear your side. What side is there? I'm composting coffee grounds. That's legal. Legal doesn't always mean popular, so she went, Kathleen beside her. both of them walking into the Douglas County Administrative Building like soldiers, heading to battle they knew they'd probably lose. The meeting room smelled like industrial carpet and old coffee. 80 people packed the space, most of them older, most of them looking at Barbara like she'd personally insulted their grandmothers. Kenneth Walker sat in the front row, smug, satisfied. A man who'd convinced himself he was fighting for justice when really he was just uncomfortable with change. The council chair, a thin woman named Patricia Wilson, with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss the petition filed by Kenneth Walker regarding agricultural operations at the Mitchell property. She looked at Barbara. Mrs. Mitchell, you have 5 minutes to address the council. Barbara stood. Her legs felt like water, her mouth dry. Public speaking had never been her strength. Robert was the talker, the charmer, the one who could convince strangers they'd been friends for years. She was just the one left behind, trying to save what he'd loved. I understand, the smell is difficult. Someone in the back muttered agreement. Barbara pushed forward, but it's temporary. Coffee grounds compost quickly when managed properly. What I'm doing isn't new, it's just new here, organic matter decomposition. Same process that's been happening in forests for millennia. Kenneth raised his hand, point of order. We're not a forest. We're a residential agricultural area where property values matter. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Barbara's hands curled into fists. My property value has been dropping for 3 years because the soil is dead. Chemical fertilizers depleted the organic matter. The land can't hold water anymore, can't support crops, can't do anything except fail. Her voice caught. She cleared her throat. This land killed my husband. He died trying to figure out how to save it, and I'm not going to let his death be for nothing. Silence, complete, absolute. Even Kenneth looked uncomfortable. Patricia Wilson removed her glasses. Mrs. Mitchell, what exactly do you hope to achieve? I hope to restore the soil, bring the organic matter back, give this land the ability to breathe again. And if you're wrong? Barbara met her eyes. Then I'll stop. But I'm asking for 6 months. Just 6 months to prove this can work. The council deliberated for 40 minutes. Barbara and Kathleen sat in the hallway outside. Not talking, just waiting. Kathleen picked at her thumbnail. Barbara stared at a water stain on the ceiling tile that looked vaguely like Nebraska. Finally, Patricia Wilson emerged. We voted 3-2 in your favor. You have 6 months. But Mrs. Mitchell? Yes, we'll be watching. Closely, in the truck on the way home, Kathleen spoke first. You said Dad's death wasn't for nothing. Oh, Barbara kept her eyes on the road. That's right, but you never talk about how he died. Not really, the road blurred. Barbara blinked hard, the combine rolled. August heat made the ground unstable. It was fast, were you there? No. Silence. Then Kathleen again, softer. Do you think he'd be proud of what you're doing? Barbara's throat tightened. I think he'd understand why I have to try. Over the next 3 months, Barbara worked the piles like a woman possessed. Every morning, 4 a.m. turning, monitoring, adjusting moisture. The temperatures stayed consistent, 140 to 160 degrees. The sweet spot, hot enough to kill pathogens. Not so hot it killed the beneficial microbes. She kept detailed notes, every reading, every observation. The way the color shifted from black to dark brown. The way the texture changed from sludge to crumbly soil. The way the smell evolved from aggressive to earthy. She was building an archive. Evidence. Proof that this wasn't madness. Kathleen helped when she was home from school. Sometimes they worked in silence, sometimes they talked. Small things. Classes. The weather. Never the big questions. Never the fear that maybe this was all a spectacular waste of time. By June, something had changed. The piles no longer looked like waste. They looked like soil. Rich. Dark. Alive. Barbara pulled a handful from the nearest pile. Let it crumble through her fingers. It smelled like forest floor, like growth, like possibility. She spread it across one corner of the back 40, planted wheat. Nothing fancy, just a test plot. 20 feet by 20 feet. She watered it, waited, prayed to whatever forces governed germination and grace. 1 week later, the wheat sprouted. Not slowly, not tentatively. It exploded from the earth like it had been waiting for permission. Barbara knelt in the dirt, ran her hands over the green shoots. They were thicker than normal wheat. Deeper green, the kind of color that came from soil that actually had something to give. Kathleen found her there an hour later, kneeling in the test plot, crying, Mom? Barbara looked up, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. It's working. Kathleen stared at the wheat, at the impossible green pushing through soil that had been dead for years. Oh my God, it's actually working. They stood there together. Mother and daughter, watching wheat grow in ground that had forgotten how. And across the fence line, Kenneth Walker stood beside his truck, staring, no longer smiling, just staring. The summer of 1997 arrived without mercy. June burned through July. July scorched into August. And by the time September limped across the Oregon calendar, Douglas County looked like something out of the Old Testament. Plague number 7, the one where God just stops pretending to care. 45% less rain than average, which sounded almost reasonable until you saw what it actually meant. Wells drying up, creek beds cracking open like broken pottery, grass turning the color of old newspaper, and everywhere that particular silence that comes when even the insects decide it's too hot to bother. Barbara stood at her fence line watching Kenneth Walker's cornfield die in real time. The stalks had given up trying to stand. They leaned against each other like drunks at closing time. Leaves curled inward, protective futile. The whole field radiated defeat. Her own corn stood 6 feet tall, green. Not the pale almost green of plants barely hanging on, actual green. The kind that made you think of chlorophyll and photosynthesis, and all those biology terms that sounded made up until you saw them working. Kenneth's truck pulled up, slower than usual. He didn't get out right away. Just sat there with the engine running and the AC blasting. Finally cut the ignition, walked over. He looked thinner. The drought had carved hollows under his cheekbones, made his eyes sit deeper in his skull. He stopped on his side of the fence, looked at Barbara's corn, then back at his own dying field. How? Not even a question, just the word. Flat. Exhausted. Barbara pulled off her work gloves, tucked them in her back pocket. The soil holds water now. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. Kenneth rubbed his face with both hands. When he dropped them, he looked older. Not just tired, aged. Like the drought had stolen years instead of rain. My corn is dead, Barbara. All of it. I've got cattle I can't feed. Bills I can't pay. And you're standing there with a field that looks like it's getting watered twice a day. I'm not watering twice a day. Then what? Barbara nodded toward the dark soil visible between her corn rows. The compost changed the structure, made it spongy. Like a sponge holds water, the organic matter holds moisture. Rain from April is still in there. Feeding the roots, Kenneth stared at the ground like it had personally betrayed him. The coffee grounds. Not just the grounds. The whole system. Carbon, biology. Time, he laughed. Bitter, sharp. I don't have time, Barb. Bank's already calling about the loan. I default, they take the farm. And you know what the real joke is? He met her eyes. 3 years ago, I stood right here and told you that you'd lost your mind. Called it a coffee dump. Laughed about it with everyone who'd listen. Barbara waited. I'm sorry. 2 words. Quiet. Real apology accepted. Kenneth kicked at a rock, sent it skittering across the gravel. Would you teach me? How to do what you did? Barbara felt something shift in her chest. Not quite pride, not quite vindication. Something softer. More like relief that she wouldn't have to carry this knowledge alone anymore. You'll need coffee grounds, straw, manure, I can get those, and patience. It takes months to build soil. You can't rush biology. Kenneth looked at his dying field again, took a breath that sounded like it hurt. How long did it take you? From start to finish? 18 months before I saw real results. I don't have 18 months, no. Barbara pulled her gloves back on. But you have now. And now is when you start. How often do we judge someone's crazy idea before we understand what they're really building? That question hung in the air between them. Unanswered. Maybe unanswerable. Kenneth left without another word. But 2 days later, a truck from Portland Roast and Bean pulled into his driveway. Started dumping coffee grounds along his back property line. The smell drifted across the valley. Familiar, bitter, hopeful. By September, 17 more farms in Douglas County had contacted Barbara. Some apologetic, some just desperate. All of them asking the same question, can you help us? She started holding workshops Saturday mornings. Free. Her barn packed with farmers who 6 months earlier had crossed the street to avoid talking to her. Now they sat on hay bales, taking notes while she explained carbon to nitrogen ratios and thermophilic decomposition. Kathleen came home from school one weekend, found 40 people in their barn watching her mother demonstrate proper pile construction with a pitchfork and genuine enthusiasm. After everyone left, Kathleen leaned against the barn door. You know this is insane, right? You're teaching them for free. Barbara rinsed her hands at the outdoor spigot. The water ran dark brown before clearing. Knowledge isn't meant to be hoarded, but you could charge. Make money. We still owe the bank, we'll pay the bank. How? Barbara shut off the water, shook her hands dry. By having crops that actually grow, the wheat harvest that fall proved her right. Barbara's yield came in 30% higher than the previous 3 years combined. The grain itself looked different, heavier, denser, the kind of quality that made buyers pause and ask questions. She paid down $15,000 on the bank loan. First significant payment in 18 months. The bank manager called personally. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have to say, we weren't sure you'd pull through." Barbara held the phone against her shoulder while she filled out the deposit slip. "Neither was I. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." She hung up, stared at the bank statement. 77,000 still owed. But that number was moving in the right direction now. Shrinking instead of growing. For the first time since Robert died, the farm felt less like a sinking ship and more like something that might actually float. Kathleen found her in the kitchen that night. Barbara had spread Robert's old notebooks across the table. His handwriting, his observations, his hope that someone would figure out how to make the soil live again. "You miss him." Not a question. Statement. Gentle. Barbara traced a line of text with her finger. Soil pH 5.8, too acidic. Need lime. Every day Kathleen sat down, pulled one of the notebooks toward her, flipped through pages filled with Robert's careful documentation. Rain dates, temperature logs, failed experiments. He'd be proud, you know. "Of what you've done." Barbara's throat tightened. "I just finished what he started, no." Kathleen looked up, green eyes serious. "You believed when nobody else did, including me. Especially me." She closed the notebook. "I'm sorry I doubted you." Barbara reached across the table, took her daughter's hand. "You were protecting yourself." Can't fault someone for that. They sat in silence, mother and daughter, the kitchen clock ticking. Outside, wind moved through cornstalks that shouldn't have survived but did anyway. The summer of 1999 made 1997 look like a practice run. Oregon burned, not metaphorically, literally. Forest fires in the Cascades, grass fires in the valley. The whole state turned tinder dry and waiting for a match, 89 days without rain. Temperature breaking 100 degrees for 2 straight weeks. The kind of heat that made old people die in their homes, and young people question why humans ever thought living here was a good idea. Douglas County declared a state of emergency. Water rationing, crop failure assistance programs, federal aid discussions. The evening news showed aerial footage of failed farms, brown rectangles where green should have been. Economic disaster filmed from above. Barbara's farm appeared in one of those shots. But unlike the surrounding properties, her field stayed dark. Her corn stood tall. Her wheat rippled in waves of gold that looked almost obscene, surrounded by so much death. The news crews showed up 2 days later. Portland Tribune sent a reporter named Michelle Martin, mid-30s, sharp, skeptical in the way journalists learn to be when a story sounds too good to be true. She climbed out of a sedan that had no business on gravel roads. Heels, pencil skirt, hair sprayed into submission. Barbara almost laughed. "Mrs. Mitchell?" "That's me." Michelle looked past her toward the fields. Her professional skepticism cracked just slightly, visible shock replacing it. "Your crops are actually alive." "Yes, ma'am. In the middle of the worst drought in 50 years. "That's right." Michelle pulled out a notebook, clicked her pen. "How?" Barbara led her through the fields, showed her the dark soil, explained the compost system, the carbon, the microbes, the water retention. Michelle took notes like she was documenting a miracle and wasn't sure she believed in those. "And you started this because?" "Because the soil was dying. And I needed it to live." Michelle stopped walking, looked at Barbara with an expression that suggested she was recalculating everything she'd assumed about rural Oregon farmers. "Do you realize what you've done here? Made good dirt." "No." Michelle gestured at the fields. "You've solved a problem that's bankrupting hundreds of farms. And you're just standing here like it's no big deal." Barbara shrugged. "Soil wants to live. I just gave it what it needed." The article ran front page. Above the fold, color photo of Barbara standing in her cornfield with drought-dead farms visible in the background. The headline, "Oregon Woman Beats Drought with Coffee Waste." The phone started ringing at 6 a.m. the next morning, and didn't stop. Farmers from Bend, Eugene, Medford. People Barbara had never met asking if she could help them. News stations requesting interviews. County agricultural extension offices wanting her to speak at conferences. Kathleen came home that weekend, found her mother sitting at the kitchen table with 47 phone messages written on scraps of paper. Post-its, envelopes, anything with a blank surface, Mom. "This is too much." Barbara rubbed her temples. "I know, you need help. I know that too." A knock at the door. Both of them froze. It was 8 p.m. Nobody showed up at 8 p.m., unless something was wrong. Barbara opened the door. A man stood on the porch, 50s, gray hair. honest face weathered by decades of outdoor work. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt and boots that had seen actual labor. Mrs. Mitchell? I'm Jonathan Wright, professor at Oregon State, Soil Science Department. Barbara blinked. It's late, I know. I'm sorry. I just drove down from Corvallis, saw the article. Had to see this for myself. He gestured toward the fields barely visible in the twilight. Could I take some samples? Run some tests? I promise I'm not here to exploit this. I just need to understand what you've created. Something in his voice. Genuine, curious. Not predatory. Barbara stepped aside. Come in. But the coffee's old. Jonathan laughed. I drink worse at the lab. They sat at the kitchen table. Barbara pulled out her notebooks, showed him her temperature logs, her mixing ratios, her observations over 4 years of trial and error. Jonathan read like a man finding scripture he'd been searching for his entire life. You've been doing this completely on your own? Mostly. No agricultural degree? No formal training? Library books. And Robert's notes. Jonathan looked up. Who's Robert? My husband. He died in '89. Spent years trying to figure out how to save this soil. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then, may I be honest with you? Please. What you've done here shouldn't work this well. The carbon sequestration alone, the water retention, the microbial activity. This is the kind of system we theorize about in academic papers, but rarely see executed perfectly in real applications. He closed the notebook carefully. You've built one of the most effective composting operations I've encountered in 20 years of soil science. Barbara felt heat rise in her face. Not embarrassment. Something else. Validation. Recognition. The knowledge that maybe she wasn't crazy after all. So what happens now? Jonathan pulled out a business card. Set it on the table. I'd like to take samples. Run full analysis. With your permission, I'd like to present the findings at the Western Soil Conference in March. Barbara picked up the card. Oregon State University. Department of Crop and Soil Science. Will it help other farmers? It could change how we approach drought farming across the entire Pacific Northwest. She looked at Kathleen. Her daughter nodded. Take your samples. Jonathan returned 3 weeks later with results that read like fiction. Carbon content 420% higher than surrounding soil. Microbial activity up 580%. Water retention improved by 310%. He sat across from Barbara in the same kitchen, same table. Different gravity to the conversation. I want to be very clear about what these numbers mean. Barbara waited. You haven't just improved your soil. You've created an entirely new soil structure, the organic matter levels, the biological diversity. This is what healthy soil looked like before industrial agriculture stripped it down to dirt. He paused. You've essentially turned back time. Barbara thought about Robert, about his notebooks, about the last thing he said before the combine took him. The soil just needs someone to believe it can live again. My husband believed it was possible. He was right. Jonathan stood, walked to the window, looked out at fields that had become the subject of academic fascination. And you proved it. But proving it came with complications. November brought the lawyers. 3 black sedans rolling up the driveway like a funeral procession. Barbara watched them from the kitchen window. Felt her stomach drop. Kathleen was home for Thanksgiving break. She saw the cars, saw her mother's face. What's wrong? I don't know yet. The lead sedan stopped. Out stepped a man in his 50s. Expensive suit, expensive haircut, expensive everything. He moved like someone used to being the most important person in every room. 2 more people followed. Another man, younger, and a woman with red hair pulled back in a bun. Both carried briefcases. Barbara met them on the porch, didn't invite them in. The lead man extended his hand. Mrs. Mitchell, Charles Thompson, lead counsel for Portland Roast and Bean Holdings. Barbara looked at his hand. Didn't shake it. What can I do for you, Mr. Thompson? Charles lowered his hand, smiled. The smile of a shark who'd learned to walk on land. We'd like to discuss ownership rights regarding the material currently composted on your property. Barbara's blood went cold. Excuse me? The coffee grounds. Technically, they remain company property. Your contract was for temporary disposal, not ownership transfer. Behind her, Kathleen stepped onto the porch. That's insane. You paid us to take your garbage. Charles's smile didn't waver. The contract language is somewhat ambiguous regarding transformation and derivative works. Our legal team believes we have legitimate claim to at least a portion of the composted material. Barbara found her voice. You want the soil. We want to discuss equitable distribution of a resource we helped create. You didn't create anything. You dumped waste you didn't want. The woman with red hair spoke up, softer than Charles. Almost apologetic, Mrs. Mitchell. We understand this is complicated. We're not trying to be unreasonable. We're simply protecting the company's interests. Barbara looked at her, really looked, saw something there, discomfort, maybe even shame. What's your name? Rachel. Associate counsel, you believe this is right, Rachel? Coming here to claim soil I built from garbage they paid me to take? Rachel's face flushed. I believe in following contract law. That's not what I asked. Silence. Charles stepped forward, the smile gone now. Just cold business. We'd like to settle this amicably, but if necessary, we're prepared to pursue legal action. You have our offer. 50% of current composted material or $180,000 in compensation. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. Set it on the porch railing. You have 2 weeks to respond. They left, black sedans rolling back down the gravel drive like they'd never been there at all. Except for the envelope. White. Corporate logo. Threat made physical. Kathleen picked it up, opened it. Read, her face went pale. They're serious. Barbara took the letter, scanned the legal language. The demands, the timeline. Yes, what are we going to do? Barbara folded the letter, tucked it in her pocket. We're going to fight. Finding a lawyer who'd work for what Barbara could pay proved harder than expected. 3 firms turned her down outright. Too small, too complicated. Too much risk against a corporation with deep pockets. She was sitting in the kitchen making the 4th call when someone knocked. Not the aggressive knock of lawyers. Something gentler. Barbara opened the door. A woman stood there, 60s, silver hair, intelligent eyes behind wireframe glasses. She wore slacks and a cardigan and carried a leather briefcase that had seen better years. Mrs. Mitchell? I'm Donna Robinson. The name tickled something in Barbara's memory. Do we know each other? No, but I know you. Read about you in the Tribune, then heard through channels that Portland Roast was coming after you. Donna shifted the briefcase. I'm a lawyer. Was. Retired last year. But I've handled agricultural disputes for 30 years, and I have strong opinions about corporations bullying small farmers. Barbara stared. Why are you here? Because 30 years ago someone helped me when I couldn't afford representation. Pro bono. Changed my life, and I've been waiting for a case worth coming out of retirement for. She met Barbara's eyes. This is that case they worked through December. Barbara, Donna, Kathleen when she was home from school. Building the defense, gathering evidence, the original contract, Barbara's meticulous notebooks, receipts for straw and manure purchased. Testimony from Brandon florists confirming Portland Roast had paid her to dispose of waste they couldn't dump elsewhere. Donna was brilliant, sharp, relentless. She'd pull case law from memory, quote precedent like poetry, and she had this way of making complex legal concepts sound like common sense, doctrine of accession. When someone adds value to raw materials and creates something entirely new, ownership transfers to the creator. You didn't just store their coffee grounds. You transformed them into soil through your own labor, knowledge, and additional resources. She tapped her pen on the table. They have no claim. Then why are they suing? Donna smiled. Grim. Because corporations like Portland Roast don't like being wrong, and they really don't like small farmers making them look bad. The trial was set for April 2000. Douglas County Circuit Court. Judge Patricia Wilson, presiding. The same woman who'd given Barbara 6 months to prove her composting could work. Now she'd decide if Barbara got to keep what she'd built. The courtroom packed the morning of opening arguments. Local farmers, news reporters, environmental advocates who'd heard about the case and saw it as precedent-setting for agricultural rights. The gallery buzzed with anticipation. Charles Thompson sat at the plaintiff's table, looking like a man who'd never lost and didn't plan to start. Rachel Miller sat beside him, still that uncomfortable look on her face whenever she glanced toward Barbara. Donna wore a navy suit that had to be 20 years old but still carried authority. She'd pulled her silver hair back, put on her courtroom face, the one that said she'd done this 1,000 times and knew how to win. Judge Wilson entered. Everyone stood. The bailiff did his thing. And just like that, Barbara Mitchell's future hung in the balance of whatever happened next. Charles Thompson opened, smooth, confident, painting Portland Roast as a victim of unclear contract language and Barbara as someone who'd taken advantage of corporate generosity. The material in question originated as company property. The contract specifically states disposal services, not ownership transfer. My client graciously paid Mrs. Mitchell to assist with waste management. That payment did not constitute sale or permanent relinquishment of said materials. He gestured toward Barbara. Mrs. Mitchell has created value from these materials. Value we celebrate and appreciate. But that transformation doesn't negate origin of ownership. We're simply asking for equitable recognition of our contribution to this success. Donna stood for cross. Mr. Thompson, you used the word waste management. Is that accurate? Yes. And waste, by definition, is material without value. Correct? Objecting to that oversimplification, Judge Wilson peered over her glasses, overruled. Answer the question. Charles shifted his weight. Waste is material no longer useful in its current form, so Portland Roast paid Mrs. Mitchell because the coffee grounds had no value to the company. They had no immediate value. Did your client ever express intent to reclaim these materials? Not explicitly. Did the contract include any language about future retrieval or ongoing ownership? Charles flipped through his notes. The language is open to interpretation. That's not an answer. Judge Wilson nodded. Answer the question, counsel. Charles cleared his throat. No, there was no explicit retrieval clause. Donna smiled. Not friendly. Victorious? No further questions. The trial ran 3 days. Witness after witness. Brandon Flores testified that Portland Roast had been desperate to find anyone willing to take the coffee grounds, that they'd tried 6 other farms before Barbara agreed. They were relieved. Almost grateful. Nobody wanted those grounds. Landfill fees were killing the budget. Dr. Jonathan Wright brought his soil analysis. Explained in detail how the current compost shared 0 DNA with the original coffee grounds. How the biological and chemical composition had transformed completely. This isn't modified coffee waste. It's new soil, created through a complex process requiring expertise, additional materials, and intensive labor. Mrs. Mitchell is the author of this creation. Kenneth Walker took the stand, surprising everyone. He'd cleaned up for court. Pressed shirt, decent pants, hair combed. He looked nervous. Kept glancing at Barbara like he needed permission to speak. Donna approached him gently. Mr. Walker, how long have you known Mrs. Mitchell? 23 years, since she married Robert. And what was your relationship with the Mitchell family? Robert was my best friend. We farmed neighboring properties, helped each other during harvest. Our families had dinner together every Sunday after church. And after Robert passed, Kenneth's jaw tightened. I pulled away. Stopped coming around. Told myself it was too hard to see Barbara struggling alone. But that wasn't the real reason, was it? He looked down at his hands. No, ma'am. Truth is, I was scared. Scared of what losing Robert meant for my own mortality, for my own farm. And when Barbara started the composting, when everyone was laughing, I laughed too. Because it was easier than admitting she might be right about something I was too afraid to try. Donna let that sit for a moment. When did you realize she was right? Summer of 1998. My corn was dying. Hers was thriving. I walked over to her fence and I saw it. Really saw it. The difference wasn't luck. It was knowledge. Work. Belief. He looked at Barbara directly now. I mocked her when she started. Called her farm a coffee dump. Told everyone she'd lost her mind. And I was wrong about all of it. His voice hardened as he turned toward Charles Thompson. If Portland Roast takes this soil, they're stealing. Plain and simple. Barbara built this. From garbage nobody wanted. She turned it into something that's saving farms across this valley. And now they want it back because she proved it valuable. Kenneth leaned forward. That's not business. That's theft dressed up in legal language. And I won't sit quiet while it happens. The courtroom was silent. Even Charles looked momentarily off balance. Donna nodded. Thank you, Mr. Walker. No further questions. But the moment that changed everything came when Kathleen testified. Donna called her on day 3. Kathleen wore slacks and a blouse. Hair down. Looking younger than her 29 years, but speaking with quiet authority. She'd been nervous that morning. Barbara saw it. The way her daughter's hands shook when she poured coffee. The way she kept checking her watch like time might run out before she said what needed saying. Barbara had pulled her aside in the courthouse hallway. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Kathleen met her mother's eyes. You've been fighting alone for too long. Now Kathleen sat in the witness box. Hands folded, breathing steady. Donna approached with a gentle smile. Tell us about your mother's work. Kathleen took a breath. My mom wakes up at 4 a.m. every single day. Has for 5 years. She turns the compost piles, monitors temperature, adjusts moisture, records everything in notebooks she keeps in the machine shed. Her voice strengthened. When I was embarrassed by what she was doing, she kept working. When the whole town laughed, she kept working. When I went away to school and left her alone on a failing farm, she kept working. Kathleen's eyes found Barbara in the gallery. When my father died trying to save this land, my mother finished what he started. She didn't just take their garbage. She gave it purpose, meaning, life. She turned to face Charles Thompson directly. You want to take what she built, but you can't. because soil remembers who saved it. And every farmer using her method knows it was Barbara Mitchell. Not Portland Roast. Not some corporation hiding behind lawyers. A woman who believed dead ground could live again. Donna let those words hang in the air. Then quietly, "Is there anything else the court should know?" Kathleen nodded. Swallowed hard. "What this court doesn't know is my mother used her last $8,000 to buy the straw and manure. That money was my father's life insurance. Every cent she had left in the world. She put it into the soil because she believed." Her voice cracked but held. "And if you take this from her, you take everything." The courtroom went completely still. Not the fidgety silence of boredom, the breathless silence of witnessing something true. Rachel Miller's face had gone white. She leaned over, whispered something urgent to Charles. He waved her off. But she kept whispering, insistent, desperate. Judge Wilson called a recess. During the break, Rachel found Donna in the hallway, pulled her into an empty conference room. Her hands were shaking as she opened her briefcase. "I have something you need to see." She handed over a manila folder. Internal Portland Roast emails, dated 6 months earlier. Donna read each one, her expression darkening with every line. CO to legal team. "The Mitchell compost has market value. Research indicates demand for organic soil amendments growing exponentially. Explore ownership options." Another email. "Public relations concerned about optics. Recommend pursuing claim quietly. Avoid media attention." And the final one. "If Mitchell contest, bury her in legal costs. Small farmer won't have resources for extended litigation." Donna looked up from the pages. "Why are you giving me this?" Rachel's eyes were red. She'd been crying in the bathroom, trying to fix her makeup. "Failing, because I went to law school to help people, to fight for justice. And this," she gestured at the folder, "this isn't justice. This is corporate bullying. Calculated exploitation." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm resigning after this trial, whatever the outcome. I can't be part of this anymore." Donna studied her, saw genuine remorse, genuine shame, genuine courage. "You know Charles will destroy your career for this." "Probably." Rachel managed a small smile. "But I'll be able to sleep at night. Thank you." Rachel nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "Mrs. Mitchell is everything they told me lawyers should be, and I've spent 3 years being everything we're not supposed to be. Tell her I'm sorry. For all of it." When court reconvened, Donna presented the emails. Judge Wilson read them, slowly, carefully. Her face could have been carved from granite. The gallery leaned forward, sensing something had shifted. "Something fundamental, Mr. Thompson. Is your client aware these communications exist?" Charles stammered, actually stammered. The polished veneer cracking. "I would need to verify." "That's not what I asked." Silence. Charles looked at his notes, at Rachel's empty chair, at anything except Judge Wilson's steel gaze. The judge removed her glasses, cleaned them with deliberate slowness, put them back on, each movement precise, controlled. The physical manifestation of judicial fury held in check. "I've seen a lot of cases in this courtroom. Property disputes, contract disagreements. Good people on both sides trying to navigate complicated situations." She looked directly at Charles. "This is not that. This is calculated exploitation. Your client identified value they didn't create, decided to claim ownership retroactively, and planned to financially exhaust a small farmer who couldn't afford to fight back." Her voice went cold. "You came into my courtroom expecting to win through intimidation and deep pockets. Instead, you've demonstrated exactly why we have laws protecting individuals from corporate overreach." She opened her notebook, wrote something, her pen scratching the only sound in absolute silence. "I'm ruling in favor of the defendant. Mrs. Mitchell retains full ownership of all composted material. Additionally, Portland Roast and Bean Holdings will pay $12,000 in legal costs and court fees to Mrs. Mitchell." The gavel came down. "This case is dismissed." The courtroom erupted. Farmers cheering, reporters scrambling. Kathleen wrapped her arms around Barbara, both of them shaking, crying, laughing, all of it at once. Donna packed her briefcase, calm, professional. But Barbara saw her hands trembling slightly. "We won." Donna looked up, smiled for real this time. "You won. I just helped." Barbara hugged her, hard, quick. The kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. Outside the courthouse, news cameras waited. Michelle Martin from the Tribune stood front and center, microphone ready. A dozen other reporters crowded around. "Mrs. Mitchell, how do you feel?" Barbara thought about it, really thought. About 5 years of fighting, of being mocked, of working alone before sunrise, of believing when no one else would, relieved. "And tired. What's next for you?" Barbara looked at the crowd, at farmers who'd driven hours to attend. At faces she recognized from her Saturday workshops. At Kenneth Walker standing in the back. At a community that had laughed at her, and then learned from her and now stood with her. Keep teaching. Keep sharing. This knowledge isn't mine to keep, someone in the crowd shouted. 3 cheers for Barbara Mitchell. The cheers rose loud, genuine. The sound of people celebrating someone who'd refused to quit when quitting made sense. Barbara stood there, stunned, overwhelmed, feeling for the first time since Robert died like maybe she wasn't alone anymore. Like maybe the soil wasn't the only thing that had come back to life. 2 months after the trial, Kenneth Walker's fields started showing green. Not the desperate pale green of plants barely surviving. Real green. The kind that came from soil that remembered how to feed what grew in it. Barbara stood at the fence line watching him work his compost pile. He'd gotten the ratios right. 40% coffee, 30 straw, 30 manure, just like she'd taught him. His pile steamed in the morning cold. Temperature probably hitting 150. Perfect range. He saw her, waved, walked over wiping sweat despite April chill. It's working? Barbara nodded. Told you it would, I know. But believing and seeing are different things. He gestured toward his field where winter wheat was already 6 inches tall. Thicker than anything he'd grown in a decade. My son asked me yesterday why I didn't listen to you 4 years ago. You know what I told him? Barbara waited. That sometimes wisdom looks like madness until it proves itself. And that I was the fool for not recognizing the difference. He extended his hand. Thank you. Barbara shook it. Firm grip. Honest, you did the work. You showed me how. By June, 17 farms in Douglas County were running active compost operations. Coffee trucks made regular rounds. The smell that had once triggered complaints now signaled hope. Economic revival. The valley was learning to breathe again. Barbara's Saturday workshops grew. 20 farmers became 40, then 60. She had to move them outside. Set up folding chairs in the field where people could see the results while she explained the process. Kathleen came home one weekend. Found her mother standing in front of 70 people demonstrating proper pile construction, like she'd been born to teach. After everyone left, Kathleen helped fold chairs. You know, you could charge for this. Barbara stacked another chair. We've had this conversation and we're having it again. Mom, you're teaching people skills worth thousands. You're allowed to value your expertise. The knowledge came from Robert's work, from his sacrifice. Feels wrong to profit from that. Kathleen stopped folding. Set down the chair she was holding. Dad would want you to take care of yourself. To build something sustainable. You can honor his memory and still charge for your time. Barbara looked at her daughter. 29 now. Smarter than Barbara had been at that age. More willing to push back. What do you suggest? A consulting fee. Nothing huge. Just enough to cover your time and materials. You're giving away hundreds of hours. That's not sustainable. Barbara thought about the bank loan. Still $43,000 remaining. Thought about the truck that needed new tires. The barn roof that leaked when it rained hard. I'll consider it. Kathleen smiled. That's all I ask. The phone call came Tuesday morning. Early. Barbara was halfway through her first coffee when it rang. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Mitchell? This is Dr. Wright. From Oregon State, Barbara sat down. Good morning, doctor. I have a favor to ask. The Western Soil Conference is in 3 weeks. Portland. I'm scheduled to present findings on drought-resistant agricultural practices, and I'd like you to co-present. Barbara nearly dropped the phone. I'm not a scientist. No. You're better. You're a practitioner. Someone who took theory and made it work in real conditions. The conference needs to hear from you directly. I don't do public speaking. You teach 70 farmers every Saturday. That's different. How? Barbara couldn't answer. Because it wasn't different. Not really, just scarier. Larger audience. Higher stakes. What would I need to do? 15-minute presentation. Your story. Your process. What you learned. I'll handle the scientific analysis. You handle the human element. Barbara looked out the window at fields that had been dead 5 years ago. At soil that now grew crops despite drought. At evidence that impossible things could happen if someone was stubborn enough to try. Okay. I'll do it. Dr. Wright's relief was audible. Thank you. I'll send details. And Mrs. Mitchell? Yes, this is going to change things. For you, for drought farming. For a lot of people who need hope right now. He hung up. Barbara sat there holding the phone, wondering what she'd just agreed to. Wondering if she'd completely lost her mind. Probably. The conference was held at the Portland Convention Center. 300 attendees, soil scientists, agricultural researchers, government officials, university professors, people who'd spent their entire careers studying what Barbara had figured out in her barn. She arrived early, wore slacks and a button-down shirt Kathleen had bought her, sensible shoes, hair pulled back, looking like someone who belonged even though she felt like an imposter. Dr. Wright found her in the speaker prep room. "You look terrified." "I am terrified." "Good. Means you care. Come on, let's go over your slides." They'd built the presentation together over phone calls and email. Photos of her fields, before and after. Charts showing her compost ratios. Temperature logs from her notebooks. Simple, visual, honest. Barbara rehearsed 3 times. Each time her voice shook less. Each time she remembered more without looking at notes. By the 3rd run-through, Dr. Wright nodded. "You're ready." "I don't feel ready." "Nobody ever does." The auditorium held 400 seats, every single one filled. People standing in the back, along the walls. Barbara saw farmers in work boots sitting next to professors in blazers. Saw young faces and old faces. Saw people who'd driven hours because they'd heard something important was happening. Dr. Wright went first. Presented the scientific analysis. Carbon sequestration rates. Microbial diversity. Water retention improvements. The numbers were staggering. The kind of data that made academics lean forward in their seats, taking furious notes. Then he introduced Barbara. Mrs. Barbara Mitchell didn't set out to revolutionize drought farming. She set out to save her farm, to honor her late husband's belief that dead soil could live again. What she created in the process is something we've been theorizing about for decades, but rarely see executed with such effectiveness. Applause. Barbara walked to the podium, gripped the edges, looked out at hundreds of faces waiting to hear what she had to say, started talking. "I'm not a scientist. I'm a widow with a farm that was failing. 3 years of failed crops, 92,000 in debt. No idea how to save what my husband died trying to protect." Silence, complete attention. Portland Roast offered to pay me to take their coffee waste, $200 a week. I said yes because I needed the money, but I'd been reading about composting, about carbon, about soil biology, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this garbage could become something valuable. She advanced the slide, showed the first photo. 5 massive black piles steaming in frozen fields. Everyone thought I was crazy. My daughter was embarrassed. My neighbors laughed. The county almost shut me down, and I can't blame them. It looked insane, smelled worse. Felt like the kind of mistake that ruins you. Next slide. Barbara standing in the test plot, green wheat pushing through black soil, but 18 months later, wheat was growing in ground that had been dead. And I realized something important. She paused. Let the words gather weight. Soil doesn't need miracles. It needs someone patient enough to feed it properly, to give it time, to believe it can heal even when every visible sign says otherwise. Next slide. Charts. Numbers, results. This isn't about coffee grounds. It's about understanding that soil is alive, that it breathes and eats and responds to care, that chemical fertilizers are like junk food, fast, effective short-term, devastating long-term. But compost, real organic matter, that's nutrition, that's medicine. That's how you rebuild what's been broken. She looked out at the audience, saw people nodding, saw farmers who understood because they'd lived it, saw scientists who understood because they'd studied it. I didn't invent this. I just listened to the soil, to what it needed, and then I gave it time to respond. Final slide. Her current fields. Lush. Green. Thriving despite drought. Dead ground can live again, but only if someone's willing to do the work, to wait through the ugly phase, to believe in what's possible even when nobody else does. She stepped back from the podium. That's all I have. Thank you. The applause started slow, then built, then became something else entirely. A standing ovation. 300 people on their feet, clapping for a farmer who'd refused to quit, who'd turned garbage into gold, who'd proved that the impossible was just the unexplored. Barbara stood there, overwhelmed, feeling tears she refused to let fall, thinking about Robert, wishing he could see this, knowing somehow he already did. After the presentation, Barbara was mobbed. Farmers pressing business cards into her hands. Researchers wanting to collaborate. County extension agents requesting her contact information for their programs. A woman in her 70s pushed through the crowd, weathered hands, kind eyes. Work boots under her dress slacks. I farm wheat near Hermiston. Been fighting drought for 6 years. Lost everything last season. She gripped Barbara's hand. You just gave me hope. Real hope, not the motivational poster kind. The kind that comes with instructions. Barbara felt her throat tighten. Start small, 1 pile. Get the ratios right. Give it time. Can I call you if I have questions? Of course. The woman hugged her, hard, quick, then disappeared back into the crowd. Dr. Wright found Barbara an hour later. She was sitting in a hallway, alone, trying to process what had just happened. You okay? I think so. Maybe. I don't know. He sat down beside her. You change minds in there. I've been to 100 conferences. Never seen a response like that. They weren't responding to me. They were responding to possibility. Same thing. He pulled out his phone, showed her an email already circulating. Regional Director for USDA Pacific Northwest. Wants to discuss potential grant funding for composting education programs. Using your model. Barbara read the email, then read it again. They want to fund this? They want to scale it. Bring your methods to farms across Oregon, Washington, Idaho. Anywhere drought is threatening agriculture. He pocketed the phone. You started something here, Barbara. Something bigger than one farm, bigger than Douglas County. This is how we change agricultural practice. One convinced farmer at a time. That night Barbara called Kathleen from her hotel room. How did it go? Standing ovation, silence. Then Kathleen's voice cracked. Mom, that's incredible. It was terrifying, but you did it. I did. Dad would be so proud. Barbara looked out the hotel window. Portland lights spreading in every direction. Thousands of lives, thousands of stories. Somewhere down there, someone else was probably fighting to save something impossible. I wish he could have seen it. Maybe he did. They talked for another hour. About the conference, about the farmers who'd approached her, about the USDA interest, about what came next. When Barbara finally hung up, she felt lighter, like she'd been carrying something heavy for years and finally set it down. The next 6 months moved fast. USDA approved a pilot grant, $50,000 for educational programming. Barbara hired Rachel Miller as administrative coordinator. The lawyer who'd quit Portland Roast had been working retail. She accepted Barbara's offer before the sentence was finished. I went to law school to help people. This is helping people. Together they built a curriculum, structured workshops, regional training sessions, a certification program for farmers who completed the full course. They called it the Douglas County Soil Recovery Project. By fall, they'd trained farmers from 14 counties. Coffee companies started partnering directly, providing grounds for free, viewing it as corporate responsibility instead of waste disposal. The economics shifted. Composting moved from fringe practice to mainstream agriculture. Kenneth Walker's farm became a demonstration site. His yields had increased 40%. His soil tests showed organic matter levels that made scientists literally pause and recheck their equipment. 5 years ago, I was going bankrupt. Now I'm teaching other farmers how to save their land. Life is strange. Barbara stood in his field, watched wind move through wheat that shouldn't exist, thought about how everything had changed. How nothing had changed. Soil still needed care. Time still mattered. Patience still won. Strange but good, definitely good. In January 2002, Barbara paid off the bank loan. Every cent. The final payment felt like exhaling after holding your breath for 13 years. She walked out of the bank, stood on the sidewalk, let winter rain fall on her face free. For the first time since Robert died. Actually free. That evening she found Robert's notebooks, sat with them at the kitchen table. Traced his handwriting with her finger, read his observations, his hope, his belief that soil could heal if someone just gave it a chance. She found a blank page in the back of the last notebook, picked up a pen, wrote, Robert, I finished it. The soil lives, the farm survives, and I finally understand what you meant. About believing, about patience, about giving broken things time to become whole again. I miss you every day, but I'm not alone anymore. The land remembers, and so do I. She closed the notebook. Put it back with the others, felt something inside her settle. Some long-held grief finally finding rest. March brought another invitation. Oregon State wanted her to speak at graduation. Honorary doctorate in agricultural science. Recognition for practical innovation in sustainable farming. Barbara tried to decline. They insisted, you've changed how we teach, how we think about soil recovery. The students deserve to hear from you, so she went. Wore the ridiculous robe, the colorful hood. Sat on stage while the president talked about innovation and dedication and the power of one person refusing to accept failure. Then they called her name. The auditorium erupted. Students cheering. Faculty standing. 3,000 people celebrating a farmer who'd figured out what academics had been theorizing about for decades. Barbara accepted the diploma. Shook hands. Moved to the podium. Looked out at faces young and eager and ready to change the world. I almost didn't come today. Because I don't have a degree. Didn't finish college. Everything I know came from library books and trial and error and my husband's notes. I'm not who you think I am. Pause. Let them wonder. But maybe that's the point. You don't need perfect credentials to do important work. You need curiosity, persistence, and enough stubbornness to keep trying when everyone says you're wrong. She gripped the podium. This doctorate is beautiful, I'm honored. But the real achievement was the first wheat stalk that grew in dead soil. The first farmer who learned from my mistakes. The first drought season's fields stayed green because someone remembered soil is alive. Next words came quiet. Fierce, you're graduating into a world with massive problems. Climate change, drought, soil degradation, and you're going to be told these problems are too big, too complex. That individual action doesn't matter. She leaned forward. Don't believe it. Because 5 years ago I was a widow with dead land and no solutions. And now 800 farms across America use methods I developed in my barn. That's not genius. That's just someone who refused to quit. She straightened. So go refuse to quit. Find impossible problems. Get dirt under your fingernails. Fail repeatedly. Learn constantly. And when everyone says it can't be done, remember that soil doesn't care about credentials. It only cares about whether you feed it properly. Final line. The one that mattered, broken things can heal. But only if someone's patient enough to do the work. The applause shook the building. Students on their feet. Faculty crying. Kathleen in the front row looking at her mother, like she was seeing her clearly for the first time. After graduation, they held a small reception. Barbara stood in the corner drinking punch and trying to avoid attention. A young woman approached. Maybe 22. Nervous energy. Bright eyes, Mrs. Mitchell? I'm graduating today. Environmental science. I wrote my thesis on your composting methods. Barbara smiled. What did you conclude? That small-scale innovation often outpaces institutional research. That practical application matters more than theoretical perfection. And that you're kind of a legend. I'm really not. You are, though. Every professor I've studied under-references your work. You changed the field. The young woman hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. How did you keep going, when everyone thought you were wrong? When your own daughter doubted you? How did you maintain belief? Barbara thought about it. Really thought. I didn't believe in myself. I believed in the soil, and that's different. Because believing in yourself is about ego. Believing in the soil is about understanding that nature wants to heal, wants to live, and if you give it what it needs, it responds. She met the young woman's eyes. Find something bigger than yourself to believe in, then serve it. The rest handles itself. The woman nodded, serious, determined. Thank you. She walked away. Barbara watched her go, saw herself at 22, young, uncertain, full of questions nobody had answered yet. Hoped that girl found her way, found her soil, found her reason to refuse quitting. By spring 2004, the Douglas County Soil Recovery Project had expanded to 6 states. Barbara spent 3 days a week traveling, teaching, consulting. She'd hired 2 more staff, built a small office in Roseburg, created something sustainable, something that would outlive her. Kathleen had taken a job with the USDA, Environmental Restoration Division, using her mother's methods to design large-scale soil recovery programs. Mother and daughter, both fighting the same fight, different battlefields, same war. One Saturday, Barbara stood in her back 40, the original field, the one where 5 coffee piles had started everything. Wheat grew there now, 6 feet tall, gold in late afternoon sun. Wind moved through it, making sounds like whispered conversations. She knelt, grabbed a handful of soil, let it crumble through her fingers, dark, rich, alive, smelling like earth and potential and second chances. Robert's voice in her memory. The soil just needs someone to believe it can live again, I believed. And you were right. You were always right. Behind her, footsteps. Kathleen, holding 2 coffee mugs. She handed one to Barbara. Sat down in the wheat. You know they're writing a case study about you. Harvard Business School. About innovative problem-solving in agricultural contexts. Barbara sipped coffee. Still too hot? That's ridiculous. It's not, though. You took a problem nobody wanted, found a solution everyone needed, and shared it freely. That's textbook transformative innovation. I just made good dirt. Kathleen laughed. You saved hundreds of farms. Changed agricultural policy. Proved that sustainable practices work better than chemical dependence. And you did it while everyone called you crazy. She bumped Barbara's shoulder. That's not just making good dirt. That's revolution. They sat together, mother and daughter, drinking coffee in a wheat field that used to be dead, watching sun drop toward the coast range, feeling wind that carried no bitterness, only gratitude, only peace. Barbara thought about the journey. 9 years from garbage dump to graduation speech, from mockery to standing ovations, from isolation to community, from dead soil to living legacy. How often do we throw away miracles because we're not patient enough to see what they can become? She'd spent years transforming what others discarded. Coffee grounds, dead land, broken dreams, all of it redeemable, all of it valuable. If someone was willing to do the work, you staying for dinner? Kathleen checked her watch. I can stay. What are we having? Whatever we can scrounge. I've been traveling too much to grocery shop. So takeout, probably. They stood, brushed off their jeans, started walking toward the house as sun painted everything gold and orange and purple. The colors of endings that were also beginnings. Halfway there, Kathleen stopped. Mom, are you happy? Barbara looked back at the fields, at wheat that grew because she'd refused to quit, at soil that lived because she'd believed it could, at a legacy built from garbage and stubbornness and love. Yeah, I really am good. You deserve it, they walked on. 2 women, 2 generations, both shaped by soil and loss, and the hard-won knowledge that broken things could heal if someone stayed patient through the transformation. Behind them, wheat swayed in evening wind. Dark soil breathed beneath it, and somewhere in the ground, microbes worked through the night, breaking down, building up, turning death into life, one microscopic transaction at a time, the way they'd been doing forever, the way they'd keep doing long after humans stopped paying attention, because soil remembered who saved it, and gratitude, unlike grudges, grew deeper with time.